Hello, my name is Lee Presser. This is my show. I speak frequently to very interesting people. Some of these conversations are so exciting, so intellectually stimulating, I thought others might like to listen in. This is the reason we started recording Conversation with Lee Presser.
Welcome to Conversation with Lee Presser. The Metropolitan Sewer District was created in 1954 by the voters of St. Louis City and County using a provision of the Missouri Constitution. At that time, MSD, which is a political subdivision, not a utility, included the city of St. Louis and a portion of St. Louis County east of what's now Interstate 270. More land was annexed by MSD in 1977. MSD's responsibilities include the interception, collection, and treatment of wastewater and for stormwater management. Today, MSD's area of responsibility includes 525 square miles. This includes all of St. Louis City and approximately 80% of St. Louis County. Within that area, MSD maintains 9,649 miles of sewers. Some of those lines are new, some were built in the 19th century. LeComb is a spokesman for MSD. He's here today to answer some of our questions. LeComb, welcome to the conversation.
Lee, great to be here.
Thanks
again.
for coming.
Absolutely.
It's always very interesting talking to you, especially since you have so much impact on so many, or not you, but your organization
Yes.
has so much impact on so many people in the Metro West area.
Yes, we literally touch everyone in some fashion, no pun intended.
Exactly. Except, now where in St. Louis County doesn't MSD touch?
So we serve 80% of St. Louis County. Our western boundary is generally Highway 109. It's not a precise boundary because we go over in a few spots here and there, but generally Highway 109 is our western boundary, and then from north to south we cover the entire county.
That's a way out there.
It is.
So you're right. You're just like the edge of the county.
Yep.
It's not. Are you have any intention of bringing the rest of the county in?
It's not for us to say. You mentioned earlier we annexed the area outside of 270. That's actually, folks come to us and then they vote on that. That's not a process that we start. It's actually
They
something
asked
that
to be
they do.
annexed.
Yes,
Yeah.
they asked to be annexed. That's
So
how we
those-
are set up.
So those guys who are on the other side of 109 would have to come to you and say, please, please bring us in.
Yes, that is
Well,
correct.
what do they do right now for sewer and water, wastewater, or stormwater management?
They have their own utilities. They have their own utility structure, and honestly, I'm not even really aware of which utilities serve them from a wastewater and drinking water perspective.
Which brings to mind, and we're just going to do just a small little bit on this. At one time, before 54, 1954, there were all of these small sewer districts, right?
Yes.
Scattered across St. Louis City, St. Louis County, and the idea was to unify all of this into one large service, right?
Since 54, we've taken in 79 separate sewer districts. Some as small as serving a subdivision. In fact, in North County, there still are a subdivision or two that is served by an individual pocket treatment plant, as it's called. But since 54, we've taken in 79 of those sub-districts, all created and using different standards, different construction materials. So folks automatically think, well, the issues MSD's dealing with are older urban issues. No, a lot of it has to do with just the construction that took place in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and going into the 80s as well.
As St. Louis County went from being just a rural, people forget that it used to be really just a lot of farmland out there, especially on the other side of 270. That used to be really just all farmland and not that long. I guess if you were talking about the 80s, even the 1980s, a lot of that was pretty much farmland.
I think the term folks used was cow pasture. That's what it was out there in the western county.
And so then these municipalities came in and they started building their own systems, and then aren't you lucky? Then you got to inherit the mess.
Yeah, just like why there are 90 municipalities in St. Louis County, same reason there are 79 separate sewer districts. The folks who moved out into the county wanted government services, they wanted other types of services, they needed those services, and so they formed them on their own. And we are now the regional entity, and certainly if we could go back and do it differently, we would, but when you're dealing with these types of systems, you don't get a do-over.
Right.
Yep.
It's already, and that's part of the problem of utilities, is that there is a hodgepodge that gets started and then all of a sudden a larger entity takes over. I think that Ameren in the past has had that same issue when they
I would
when they
imagine,
were
yes.
taking
Yeah, I would
over
imagine.
smaller
Yeah.
systems and integrating them into the Ameren
Mm-hmm.
system. So let's see now. Stormwater. Let's talk about stormwater for a little bit. That's become a big deal, especially since the December rains, hasn't it?
It has. You know, stormwater in our area. So it's important to keep in mind that MSD, we're two utilities under one umbrella, a wastewater utility and a stormwater utility. What that means for us is that we have to account for the activities and revenues that fund each separately. We can't,
Really?
We can't take, for example, take wastewater dollars and spend them on stormwater activities. And so when folks hear about $4.7 billion, MSD Project Clear, that all has to do with wastewater. The stormwater system, our activities under stormwater are funded by tax structure, and I say structure very intentionally because it is a hodgepodge of taxes, but they're two separate functions. So on the wastewater side of the house, you do have situations where stormwater impacts the wastewater system, and we're addressing those issues through the agreement.
That's the overflow? Is
The
that what it's
overflows
called?
and the basement backups. We're addressing that through the agreement we have with the Environmental Protection Agency and the Missouri Coalition for the Environment. But on the stormwater side of the house, we deal with stormwater when it doesn't hit the wastewater system, but there's also a number of environmental impact issues that we need to deal with as well. That's eventually stemmed from the Clean Water Act that was passed in the 70s.
Now, today is March the 8th, and we're, over the next few days, are scheduled to have like, 2-3 inches of rain. Does that mean that MSD does anything to prepare for this?
No, there isn't anything special that you do. For example, we have 160,000 street inlets. 160,000. We have almost 10,000 miles of sewers. You don't wait for the weather forecast to decide to do something, because you just can't do it. It would be impossible. So we do maintenance throughout the year that's routine for us, but it's comprehensive in terms of making sure the system is at peak condition at all times. And so certainly, there's a few tweaks here and there that we do in anticipation of a large rain event, mainly in our treatment plants. But once the weather forecast comes, that isn't the time to start doing the work. We do this work year-round, maintain it, make sure the system is ready at all times.
Okay. Now, December of 2016, you thought that'd be a good time to take some personal time, didn't you?
I did.
And so you were either out of town or on your way out of town?
I was actually out of the country on my delayed honeymoon. I got married in April, and because of my life and my wife's life, we couldn't take a honeymoon at the time, so we planned on doing it over the Christmas holidays. Traditionally a time where not a lot's going on work-wise.
Right. And it wasn't until you got this phone call.
Well, on the way to the airport, it started raining, so I made a few phone calls. My staff was there. They took care of things, but unfortunately, I was not here for that, but our staff, they did a great job under trying circumstances. A lot of our people gave up their holidays, working 24 hours around the clock over that traditional holiday week.
And how much rain came down during that short period of time? I mean, like a week?
Depends where you lived, but between 5 and 9 inches. Some places it was well above a 100-year rain event. I believe in some places even almost a 500-year rain event. But the rain itself wasn't the devastating aspect. Because if you would, it rained inland, away from the Mississippi, Missouri, and Merrimack rivers, so all that water needs to make its way to one of the major rivers, and it's the flash flooding. It was literally flash flooding that took place, which was so devastating. On the Merrimack River, all-time highs for the peak, 500-year flood event. I believe the river rose something like 20 feet in a matter of a couple days, then went back down in a matter of a couple days. So a devastating event. Hopefully what we see here over the next couple days won't reach that point, but it is going to be, if we have 2-3 inches in an hour, there's going to be challenges, not just with the sewer system, but in our entire area.
I was going to say, and then we'll go over to another subject, but I was going to say, this is why they should still continue to teach geography in class, because people, they don't think about the fact that, a lot of people think that the land is flat, but it's not really flat. It's all curved, and that's why the Mississippi is where it's at. It's a low spot, and the Missouri and the Merrimack, those are low spots, and all that water that's coming from higher up has to dump off somewhere, and then MSD has to deal with it along the way, because your job is to channel this water so that it actually makes its way to the rivers.
Well, to a certain degree, to where we have stormwater sewers, we have that responsibility. but much of our area is still served by natural creeks and streams, and those streams and creeks are private property. And you do run into issues with erosion and the like. And the fact of the matter is, if you're going to live near a creek or stream, you're going to have problems when it rains like this. You're going to lose ground, and perhaps that floodplain activates and it may hit your home. And so there's risks that you take when you live near a waterway, regardless if it's only a few feet wide most of the time. During a 2-3 inch downpour, that could jump to being several feet wide.
Yeah, people out west, there's what look to be like dry creek beds, and oh yeah, it's just dry out here. But when those storms come, all of a sudden flash flood, they're raging, and then it's gone.
Yeah, and then it's gone.
And that's the same thing, although not quite as wild in Missouri, in the St. Louis County area, but to the same extent. But you did have all this rain, and unfortunately, you had a problem in Fenton with what I don't know.
Well, more than a problem, Lee.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, okay, let's be honest.
Yeah.
You had tell the story.
Sure. We have 2 treatment plants along the Merrimack. One in Valley Park, which we call our Grand Glaze plant, and then the Fenton treatment plant in Fenton, Missouri, which you referenced. Both plants went underwater. Grand Glaze not as much as Fenton. Grand Glaze was back up and running within a matter of a couple weeks.
And what do these facilities do?
They treat wastewater. The sewer systems connect with these treatment plants.
So when you flush your toilet, it goes
where
through
it
there.
ends up.
Right.
The Fenton plant was under 6 feet of water, almost a total loss. We had a levee built around it. We adhered to all flood protection standards, but that was a 500-year flood event. And it went completely underwater, and at this point, well, I shouldn't say at this point because we are somewhat recovered, but it's been a salvage operation. We lost the plant completely for a while. Raw sewage was going into the Merrimack. We have since been able to put back online part of the treatment process. We still have a ways to go. We expect that to be complete at some point in April based on what we know today. But just like many homes, the thousands of homes that flooded out, or treatment plant flooded out, we're going to be dealing with it for several more months yet.
There was a lot of water, and how bad of a biological issue was it when this raw sewage is coming from your Fenton plant untreated and going off into the river?
Well, it's certainly not desirable by any stretch of the imagination. Let me just say that first and foremost.
We're talking filth here.
But you got to keep in mind, modern treatment plants are really a relatively new phenomenon. In the past, decades ago, the sewage was intentionally flushed out into creeks and streams. And water companies are still able to treat water. People are still able to recreate on rivers. Not to say that was the right thing to be happening. So from an environmental standpoint, the environment does process the E. coli bacteria and the other bacterial load on its own. The E. coli levels in the river are certainly up, but some folks, they're scared about contamination and things of that matter. And one of the questions I was getting from a resident was, well, what happens if I walk on ground that has been, had those waters on them? Well, it's really no different than dog droppings being in a lawn. Would you disinfect your lawn and, dig it up and take it to a landfill because a dog had defecated on it? No. Bacteria, the E. coli we deal with, does break down naturally in the environment, but because of what was happening at the treatment plant, a larger load of that bacteria was going into the environment. So we posted signs all along the Merrimack, just letting folks know, hey, we're advising you to stay away, and if you do come in contact with the water, just make sure you wash with soap and water, just like you normally would after using the bathroom.
And so now you say that you've got this thing partially back up. So you're taking the solids out?
We're taking the solids out. There's 2 more steps. There's a bacterial process where we have bacteria that eats away the pollutants and the bad bacteria, if you would.
And that's not happening
And that's not happening yet because, again, that was completely flooded out. And then there's a 3rd step that we take during the recreation season, which is called disinfection. And at the Fenton plant, we use ultraviolet light to provide that disinfection. And so a very intensive electronic process that was completely flooded out, so we're rebuilding that as well.
So now that when you have this facility completely rebuilt, what are you going to do about the next, I know they call it a 500-year flood, but in fact, it's really a percentage of a chance, like 0.2% per year.
Or to put it a different way, because I figured this out, it would be like flipping 10 quarters at the same time and each of them coming up heads.
Right.
Astronomical.
Right. But nevertheless, it could happen again. It could happen again a year, we had let's see, we had floods in '93 and then again in '95.
Yep.
And we've had, you know,
Oh,
they keep talking about 100-year floods,
yeah.
but nevertheless, they don't last. It doesn't last 100 years from 100 to the next 100-year flood, does it?
So the situation we're in with the Fenton plant, that's a plant that's only going to be open 10 more years. And we're going to consolidate that plant with our lower Merrimack wastewater treatment plant at Fine and Telegraph Roads in South County. We've had that intention for a long time. All our plants are built higher up in the floodplain. They have some level of flood protection, and we've adhered to all the best engineering standards. But that's certainly something we're going to take a look at. But it's disconcerting from a broader viewpoint, because all the standards that were used for anything now kind of seem to be becoming passe, because to your point, it seems that we're having more 100-year rain events where, you know, instead of rain coming down 3 inches over a day, it's in an hour. And that's what's overwhelming a lot of systems. You know, some folks say, well, why do you have your treatment plants next to a river? Well, our system is gravity powered. We rely upon gravity. And if we build a treatment plant on a hill, well, our pumping costs would burn so many fossil fuels that I think it would defeat the environmental protection intent of it. So sometimes there just aren't any good solutions. But we did have all the best standards in place. We had a levee in place. Mother Nature can trump you, though, whenever she wants to. I mean, just look at the hurricanes we've had along the Gulf Coast, New Orleans, up in New York, Hurricane Sandy, the snowstorms. You're never going to be able to handle Mother Nature at all times.
No, we do. Engineers do the best that they can,
yeah.
right? And you have a good set of engineers that work for you, very professional staff, and they're trying to do the best that they can for the public, right?
Well, they are, but there's also a question there, how much is the public willing to pay? Our rates are already in the 40s. You know, we talked a little bit earlier off camera about them going up to the $60, maybe $90 range. That's just for a program we have current right now. If you want to build a sewer system to a 50 or 100-year standard, and for something that's only going to get used maybe once or twice a year, that's going to be an additional significant cost. And people are already, you know, worried about what they're paying just to their current plans. I don't think there's much willingness to pay for that type of investment without the benefit being there. And when you do the cost benefit, it just doesn't come out that way. But we do adhere to all standards.
Exactly. Well, exactly. And you're absolutely right that there are people who want the Cadillac and are willing to spend other people's money to get it.
Yeah.
You know? But when all of a sudden, I mean, it wasn't that long ago that the sewer bill that came to most people was somewhere around $25, $26 a month. And now your current bill is what?
It's almost $42 a month for the average single-family household.
Right, and that's over just a 3-year period?
Oh, we're a little bit longer than that, 4 or 5 year period.
4 or 5 years.
But you know, I'll go back to 2003 when we started these rate increases. The average single-family bill was $12 to $13 a month. Now, what I will tell you though, that was way too low, and it had been too low because we are actually the 4th largest sewer system in the United States. We weren't raising enough money to properly maintain that system, let alone all the other regulatory issues we had.
And as I mentioned in the introduction, you've got this 9,000 miles of sewer pipe, which some of it from the 19th century, which has to be updated, and that somebody's got to pay for that.
So you know, let me disabuse a misnomer there. Just because something's from the 19th century doesn't mean it's not functional.
Right.
We still have sewers in downtown St. Louis that are made partially of wood, and they're functioning just fine. It's the design standards, the time that went into designing them, the building materials that you use that are really the key factor in how long a piece of pipe will last.
Okay.
That's why a lot of folks say, oh, this is an older urban core issue. No, out in the county, there were a lot of sewers built in the 50s, 60s, and 70s that were just built to low standards. I think of the former Fifi sewer district, which we took over, which covers some of the North County area going towards the western part of the county. And it's just, we keep having reoccurring problems. It just makes you think, gee, did they build the sewers using cardboard at the time? So just because something's older doesn't mean that's the problem. We're a regional agency. We don't get into city, county, old versus new. These problems are all over, and everybody has a share of them. So just because you live in one part of our service area, don't think that you're disconnected from them. No, in your area there are problems as well.
I'm going to move on to a different thing, but before we go there, I just want to ask a quick question.
Sure.
If you know the answer, fine. If not, you don't. What's up with Flint, Michigan? What is the problem there?
I'm not a drinking water authority. I grew up in Detroit, so I know a lot about it. But just because in a professional aspect, I'm not going to get into that because we are not a drinking water utility, and it wouldn't be my place.
Okay,
Yeah.
fine. But now we're talking about stormwater. We're talking about sewer. And you, in April election?
April 5th.
April 5th election, MSD is going to be going before the voters of the 80% of St. Louis County and the 100% of St. Louis City.
Correct.
And asking what?
Well, as we have in the past, we have two propositions, Proposition Y and Proposition S. Proposition Y deals with wastewater. As we have 3 times in the past, we're asking voters, how do you want to pay for this work from the agreement we have with EPA and the Missouri Coalition for the Environment? We're asking voters, do you want to use $900 million in bonds, and rates will go from $40 a month to $60 a month over the next 4 years? Or do you not want to use bonds and rates will go from $40 a month now to almost $95 a month in 4 years? It's the bond use. How do you finance it? And just like folks use a mortgage to purchase a home, that's essentially what we're proposing. It's not a question if the work gets done. It has to get done, but there is a financing option. And both a yes or no vote come with pros and cons. So we don't have a position. We're agnostic on it. But just as we have in the past, we're presenting that option to voters.
At what point do the rates go back to 25?
Never. Rates are never going to go back there because
Okay.
we have the fourth.
At what point, when you're done with the work, no, not at what point. When you're done with the work, do you anticipate rates falling down again?
We do anticipate a dip in rates, maybe in 8 years, maybe in 12 years, and certainly as the work goes down, finishes, rates will go down. Under current regulations, more regulations could come on board. But rates do need to stay relatively high versus what they were in the past, because in the past we weren't even paying for the system. 4th largest system. The worst thing in the world would be to, at the end of $4.7 billion in 23 years of spending, is in another 20 years after that find ourselves right back in the same position because we kept rates artificially low. Rates need to be higher than they were. They're not going to stay where they are. But we anticipate some level of dip, but it's difficult to say because if we use more bonds, then a lot of that is factored into where do interest rates go. What happens with that. So it's difficult to give you an exact answer when that will happen, but we predict in 8 to 12 years there should be some dip under current regulations.
Speaking of regulations,
Yes.
I understand before you started all this $4.7 billion worth of work, before the government was forcing you to follow these regulations that they have established, were people in the St. Louis area getting sick because your system was not up to the standards that the federal government had set up?
Sure. Well, somebody could get sick from a discharge of wastewater.
Had anybody gotten sick?
Let me finish my answer.
Okay.
Somebody could get sick. In my time at MSD, and I've been there since 2003, I am aware of no one getting ill because of an overflow into an area creek or stream. Now, I will tell you also, though, that there are environmental impacts. It does impact aquatic life. It does impact the environment. What we had with overflows, having an overflow is really the lesser of 2 evils versus having thousands of basement backups every time it rains. In the 21st century, though, with the Clean Water Act being well over 40 years ago, we needed to get a 21st century sewer system. So the work needed to be done. From 1992 to 2012, we'd already spent $2.7 billion addressing overflow issues and the same issues that we're addressing through the consent decree. Our issue is really how quickly does that work need to get done. We had proposed 30 to 40 years. At the time we were sued by EPA, the average agreement was 15 to 18 years. We got 23 years. And time is important because the shorter your window, the more spending you have to put into that window, and thus higher the rates are. So we got that. When we were first sued, we thought we were going to get a $6 billion consent decree. We got $4.7 billion. I'd say, relatively speaking, especially when you look at what other areas like Cincinnati, Atlanta, Kansas City, every other major metropolitan area in the country that they've got, I think we got a very, very fair deal from EPA.
Now let's, in the last 4 minutes that
Sure.
we have here, talk about your stormwater provision
Sure.
you're having people vote on.
Stormwater. If you go to our website, stlmsd.com, we do have a page there with the information. I encourage folks to look at the map for stormwater because stormwater is, for us, essentially a hot mess. Part of my glibness, but I have no other way to describe it. Where you live determines how much you pay to MSD in terms of property taxes that go towards stormwater service. And how much you pay for stormwater service determines what kind of service you get. Depending on where you live, again, you could pay up to 3 types of taxes and a stormwater fee that's on each monthly MSD bill. The result is folks outside of 270 go without stormwater service. If they have a collapsing sewer pipe, we don't have enough money to fix that pipe. All we can do is the regulatory required work we're required to do out there. So long story short, what we're trying to do is go to one tax rate for everyone, and everybody gets the same level of service. We quit this hodgepodge. People we have haves and have-nots. Everyone gets treated fairly on the payment side and on the service side. If Proposition S is approved, we'll then do $67 million in stormwater projects because we'll have fund balances left over from those old taxing districts. There'll be a finite list of projects, but if Proposition S is passed, when we do those projects, we then intend to go out and start talking to folks, hey, what does the community want to do about stormwater projects going
I was going to ask
forward?
you, what are these projects going to look like or accomplish?
Well, it's going to be, you know, the worst of the worst that are out there. Some things that we don't address regularly, like erosion issues. Some areas need some, you know, new, larger sewers. Some areas don't have stormwater sewers at all. Things like that we need to address. You know, the list goes from about 100 feet of stormwater pipe in one area to their large erosion restoration creek banker projects that we'll be doing that we don't do right now and are not in our service level. It's a finite list. We will have to go back to the public and start having a conversation about do we continue that once the $67 million is done.
Now you mentioned that creeks are private property.
They are.
And yet they're really part of that stormwater system though, aren't they?
They are, and that's why, you know, if folks recall the impervious rate from several years ago, we had proposed something much more robust. Unfortunately, the courts defeated us on the implementation. When it comes to creek maintenance and addressing those issues, they are private property issues, but MSD, we're really in the best position to address those issues. And so, you know, hopefully, you know, idealistically, that's the point we will get to in several years. We'd hope to get there through the impervious rate, but Proposition S is really the first step on getting us to the point where we can be a proper stormwater utility.
We're down to our last minute or so here. Is there anything that you would like to say before, in the last 30 seconds?
Sure.
I just gave me the cue.
Just encourage folks to vote on April 5th. Don't vote based on your opinion on MSD. If you love us or hate us, vote on what is right for you in your community. But bottom line, vote on April 5th.
Right. And if they vote no on why, is it?
If they vote no on why, rates will more than double. If they vote yes, rates will stay lower. And Proposition S is about equalizing service and taxes.
Right. Well, that's pretty straightforward. Have you done any research to find out what people are thinking on yes, no?
Well, based on Proposition Y, last time we did this, 85% of voters approved. The 2 times before that was in the 60% range. Proposition S, you know, I think it's a coin toss at this point. We'll have to see how it goes.
Do you just need a simple majority?
Yes, 50% plus 1.
Thank you. I've been speaking with Lance LeComb. He is spokesperson for Metropolitan Sewer District, MSD as it's better known. We've had a very interesting discussion here. There is going to be in April 2016, for those who live in St. Louis City, for those who live in most of St. Louis County, 2 things for you to vote on, which we were just discussing. And you really need to look these things up. Go to their website, you'll learn more there about this. We're going to be uploading this whole show to YouTube so that you can show it to friends and they can look at it at their leisure. I want to thank you and see you next time. Goodbye.